The nights in Maplewood were usually silent. The kind of silence that seemed to listen back. From the narrow window of his small rented house, Ethan often watched the lights flicker in the home next door, a warm, steady glow that belonged to Daniel and his wife, Claire. They were the kind of couple who waved politely but never stayed long enough for real conversation. Yet somehow, over the past year, Ethan had begun to notice the little details about them, the way Daniel watered his plants in the morning, or how Claire's laughter filled their porch like a song he didn't know he missed. Ethan lived alone. He worked from home as a freelance designer, speaking more to his computer than to people. Days blurred into evenings, evenings into empty nights. He had grown accustomed to the rhythm of isolation until Daniel began saying hello more often, first in passing, then at the fence, then during brief, accidental meetings that never really felt accidental. There was a quiet ease between them, one that didn't need explanation. One late Friday, the sound of rain tapping against Ethan's window was broken by a knock at his door. He checked the clock, 11:47 p.m. No one ever came by that late. When he opened it, Daniel stood there, damp from the drizzle, a hesitant smile on his face and a bottle of wine in his hand. "Sorry for the hour," Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Claire's out of town for a few days, and, well, the house feels a little too quiet." Ethan hesitated, his mind running through a dozen polite ways to decline. But Daniel's tone wasn't casual, it carried something softer, lonelier. Against his better judgment, Ethan stepped aside. "Come in." Daniel entered with an awkward gratitude. The air between them felt heavy, like a space waiting to be filled. They settled in the living room, 2 glasses between them. The wine wasn't fancy, but it was enough to loosen the stiffness of unfamiliar company. Their talk began with harmless things, the weather, broken streetlights, neighborhood gossip. Daniel's laugh was low and unguarded, his stories simple yet warm. Ethan found himself responding more openly than usual, almost forgetting the hour, the strangeness of the situation. As the conversation deepened, Daniel leaned back on the couch, his eyes distant. "You ever feel like you're living beside your own life?" he asked suddenly. Ethan looked at him, uncertain how to answer. Daniel continued before he could. "Claire's been gone a lot lately. Work, mostly. But even when she's here, it feels like she's not. I don't blame her. He trailed off, staring at the swirling red in his glass. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm hard to see." Ethan understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. He had built walls around himself, out of fear, habit, maybe both, and behind them, he had watched his own life grow distant. "Maybe people don't see us," he said quietly, "because we stop showing who we are." Daniel glanced up. "And if we don't even know who that is anymore?" The question hung in the air, raw and uncomfortably honest. Ethan had no answer. The sound of rain filled the silence between them, slow and rhythmic, like a pulse. When Daniel finally stood to leave, it was already past 1. He thanked Ethan and walked him to the door, though he was the one leaving. On the porch, under the dim light, he paused. "It's strange," he said softly. "I've lived next to you for 2 years and never really talked. But tonight, I feel like I know you better than anyone." Ethan's chest tightened. "Maybe sometimes it takes a quiet night to hear what's really there." Daniel smiled faintly, not a happy smile, but a knowing one. Then he stepped out into the rain and crossed the yard, his figure fading into the darkness between their homes. Ethan stood at the doorway for a long while, the echo of that smile lingering. When he finally closed the door, the house felt smaller, heavier. He turned off the lights, but sleep refused to come. Lying awake, he realized something had shifted, not in the world, but inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow's deadlines or the hum of loneliness. He was thinking about Daniel, the sound of his voice, the way his eyes softened when he spoke, and the quiet truth neither of them had dared to name. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, Ethan's heart began to stir with a warmth he didn't yet understand, and a fear he couldn't quite shake. The following days were heavy with tension, a delicate balance between secrecy and longing. Alex moved through the house with an acute awareness of every footstep, every glance, every sound that might betray him. Marcus, too, carried himself with careful discretion, but the brief moments they shared, an accidental brush of hands, a lingering look across the living room, were enough to set Alex's heart racing. The thrill of what had begun mingled with an ever-present fear, one wrong word, one careless movement, and the fragile intimacy would shatter. Despite the risk, Alex couldn't pull away. He found himself lingering in the kitchen while Marcus prepared meals, fabricating questions just to hear his voice, just to feel the warmth of his presence nearby. Marcus's laughter became a private treasure, a small comfort in the otherwise rigid, controlled environment of the house. Alex noticed the way Marcus's eyes held a mixture of amusement and something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement that they shared a secret world that belonged to no one else. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall windows of the mansion, Alex and Marcus found themselves alone in the study. Alex had been arranging some papers when Marcus entered to retrieve a book for Richard. Their eyes met, and the charged silence stretched long enough that Alex felt it settle into his chest like a weight he both dreaded and welcomed. Marcus leaned slightly forward to reach the shelf, and their hands brushed, again, a spark igniting where restraint and desire collided. "It's late," Marcus said softly, though his voice carried no judgment, only awareness. Alex swallowed hard, the words unspoken lingering between them. "I know," Alex replied, his voice barely audible. Every inch of the room seemed amplified, the ticking of the clock, the rustle of pages, the shallow rise and fall of their breaths. It was as if the world had contracted to the space between them, a private chamber of suspended time where nothing existed except the pull that drew them together. The days that followed were a delicate dance. They shared stolen moments in corridors, exchanged quiet words under the pretense of chores, and occasionally lingered longer than propriety allowed. Each interaction strengthened the unspoken bond, and yet, the fear of discovery loomed ever larger. Alex often imagined Richard entering unexpectedly, the consequences of being caught playing vividly in his mind. Yet, the risk made their connection more intoxicating, more urgent, a forbidden fruit that neither could resist. Through it all, Alex began to understand the depth of his own feelings. This was no longer a fleeting fascination or curiosity, it was attachment, desire, and a burgeoning love that challenged everything he had been taught about control, propriety, and family hierarchy. Marcus, too, displayed subtle vulnerabilities, moments of quiet reflection when he seemed almost human in the face of the household's rigid expectations. Alex realized that their intimacy was as much emotional as it was physical, a connection that transcended the surface of attraction and touched the core of who they were, yet, reality remained unavoidable. Richard's presence, even in absence, cast a shadow over every interaction. Alex knew that the house, for all its luxury and order, was a cage of societal expectations, and that their secret existed in constant defiance of those walls. The thrill of infidelity, of bending rules, of exploring forbidden desire, was exhilarating, but it carried a weight that demanded careful navigation. Each stolen moment became a lesson in restraint and courage, a delicate balance between yearning and caution. By the end of the week, Alex stood by the large window in his room, gazing at the dimly lit garden. Marcus had returned to his duties downstairs, moving through the house with quiet diligence. Alex's thoughts were a tangled web of desire, guilt, and anticipation. He understood, with a mixture of clarity and dread, that nothing would ever be the same. Their connection had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the consequences, though unseen, loomed as large as the mansion itself. Yet, despite the fear, Alex felt a deep, undeniable certainty. Something vital had awakened in him, something that challenged his understanding of love, loyalty, and desire. He did not know what the future held, whether discovery would bring shame, rebellion, or liberation, but he knew that the spark between him and Marcus had lit a fire that could not be extinguished. And in that knowledge, a strange comfort settled over him. Some things were worth the risk, no matter the cost. Morning light crept across the apartment floor, washing everything in muted gold. The world felt quieter now, almost unfamiliar. Ethan Ward stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hands, staring at the street below. The city moved as it always had, but inside him, something had changed. The noise that once filled his chest had softened into stillness. It wasn't peace yet, but it was close. It had been 2 weeks since the night he told Mark the truth. Since then, their conversations had grown fewer, yet gentler. There was no shouting, no resentment, just two people learning how to let go without destroying what was left. Mark had chosen to stay with a friend for a while, giving Ethan space, the kind he'd never known he needed. The first few nights alone were strange. The silence stretched long, echoing with memories of laughter, arguments, and unspoken words. But by the fourth morning, Ethan began to notice the small things, the way sunlight hit the kitchen tiles, the rhythm of rain on the balcony, the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Ordinary moments that once slipped past him now felt like tiny acts of healing. Still, some part of him couldn't shake the thought of Dr. Adrian Cole. He hadn't reached out since that last night. Not a call, not a message. It was exactly what Ethan had asked for, yet the absence carried its own kind of weight. Adrian's words lingered. Sometimes connection comes to show us what we're missing, not to replace it. One evening, after work, Ethan walked past the clinic again. The building looked the same, quiet, steady, unremarkable. The light in Adrian's office glowed faintly through the frosted glass. For a moment, Ethan considered going in, just to say thank you, but he stopped himself. Some goodbyes were better left in silence. Instead, he smiled faintly to himself, turned away, and kept walking. That night, he opened his journal for the first time in years. The pages were blank, waiting. He began to write, not about Adrian, or Mark, or guilt, but about himself. The boy who had learned to measure love through approval. The man who had forgotten that loyalty meant nothing without honesty. His handwriting trembled at first, but soon flowed steadily, as if each sentence was lifting a little more weight from his heart. Days became weeks, and with each passing one, Ethan found small ways to rebuild. He started jogging in the mornings, cooking simple meals, calling old friends he hadn't spoken to in months. Slowly, life began to feel less like a performance and more like something he was actually living. Then one afternoon, as he walked through a local bookstore, a familiar voice caught his ear. "Didn't expect to see you here," it said gently. He turned, and there was Adrian, standing in the aisle, a book in hand, the same calmness in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian smiled, a little unsure, a little warm. "You look better," he said. "I feel better," Ethan replied. And he meant it. Adrian nodded, his expression softening. "Good. That's all I hoped for." They spoke for a few minutes, about ordinary things, books, weather, work. Nothing like before. Yet beneath the casual words was a quiet understanding. Whatever they had shared had served its purpose. It had been real, but it belonged to a different time. As they parted ways, Adrian said, "Take care, Ethan." Ethan smiled. "You too, Doctor." Walking out into the street, Ethan felt the cool wind brush his face. He realized that closure didn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrived in the shape of a simple conversation, or even in silence. That night, he received a message from Mark, "Thinking about coming home this weekend. Only if you're ready." Ethan read the words twice before replying. "Let's talk. Maybe we can start again, this time, honestly." He didn't know what would come next, reconciliation, friendship, or something entirely new. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. Standing by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance, Ethan felt a quiet gratitude, for the pain that taught him self-awareness, for the man who helped him see it, and for the love that still had a chance to grow, even if differently. He whispered into the quiet room, almost like a vow to himself. Sometimes the heart breaks not to destroy us, but to make space for what's true. The night outside deepened into calm. The curtain between past and present had finally fallen, and on the other side, Ethan stepped forward, breathing freely at last.